Okay, so hi, welcome to my first tutorial video. I'll probably keep this one short and just do a small section of the painting to show you the way I work. Here's the photograph that I'll be painting from. It's Robert Smith of The Cure, and this is a commission for a customer. So I've drawn out my drawing. I'm not going to be going into drawing techniques because that's a completely different discipline altogether, and you'll find lots and lots of videos online if that's the way you want to go, if they're the skills you want to improve. And really it's just all about practice, So here we go. I'm going to start off by blocking in a lot of the dark areas. A lot of watercolour artists work from light to dark. I do sometimes, but I do also find it really helpful to get my darks in, so I know where I'm going. I've got something to hang the rest of the painting off. I know what my dark tones look like, so I've got some sort of comparison. So we're not going to worry at this stage too much about it. We're just going to block in this whole area that needs to be dark. One of the things about watercolour, of course, is that it's not as forgiving as a lot of other media. With a lot of other media, you can add white, of course, on top. You can keep working it backwards and forwards. With watercolour, you can't do that. Once it's down, it's pretty much down, although you do have a lot more freedom than you think, because you can lift out colour, which is what we're going to do now. So I'm not too concerned that this is going to be looking a bit ugly for a while. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put some clean water in this area that I want the dark to be on. Carefully going around my lines and not being very careful anywhere else. Just scrub that in, and then I'm going to drop some dark. This is Payne's Grey. Just drop some dark into the area, not being too concerned about it, and just leave that alone. It'll spread. We're going to come back at some point and all this area will be blocked in, so I don't mind getting a bit of texture in there at the moment. Now then, I want here, this solid line, I want to soften that out, and I want it to be a lot darker. I think I might put some burnt sienna in there as well, because I want it to be nice and dark, just not as dark as the black, and I do love burnt sienna. So I'm going to drop some of that in here, and this will also, these edges are still wet. I hope you can see how the burnt sienna is just bleeding so nicely into the Payne's Grey here, and I'm just going to let that happen. I'm not going to fuss about with it too much. I'll make that area just a bit lighter by taking a clean brush, fairly dry, and just skipping it along there to pick up some of that colour. Now then, while my edges are still wet, what I want to do to warm this whole thing up is to go in along this edge with some cadmium yellow, one of my favourites. So I'm just going to go in along that wet edge, let those two blend a little bit, encourage them along a little bit, get a bit of red in there as a midpoint to between the grey and the yellow. Not overly concerned about it, don't really care that it's looking a bit doing its own thing at this point. And when I put that up there, see how this colour flows? Let that be. It takes quite a leap of faith to be a watercolour artist. Just let stuff happen. I want to drop just a little bit of orange in there, and I'm going to leave that alone now, I think. Now with this area, I want a little bit of ultramarine, not ultramarine, burnt sienna on my brush. I'm going to start from this edge here. This is hair all coming down here, so don't mind if I bleed that over at this point. Remembering not to put your hand on that bit down there, that happens quite a lot. So then I'm going to get some orange, and I'm just going to drop it in here. Now this edge is starting to get a little dry, so I'm going to struggle with it a little bit. I can scrub it a bit if I want to, but I quite like what's happening here, so I'll leave that alone. And I'm just going to sort of feather this edge along. I hope my hand's not in the way of the camera as I'm doing this. Get a bit of yellow in there. There we go. and just bring this down. Now this comes down the edge of the hair like a highlight. So I'll just drop that in there now. Soften these edges, clean water. I always keep a piece of tissue in my hand, so I go clean water, dry it off a little bit, and down we go to soften that edge. Okay, what's going on with this corner of this eye here? I've got a hard edge here. I'm going to take some of my cadmium yellow. Quite strong, but quite a dry brush, not soaking wet. I don't want it flowing all over the place. And I'm just going to drop it in here whilst gently scrubbing this edge. Soften that edge off a little bit. A little bit of red down here. They can work very nicely together. Payne's grey, cadmium red and cadmium yellow. So you can just play about with that a little bit. Don't want that bright bit of yellow there, so I'll just blur that off like that. That's looking quite good. Now then, I will do another tutorial of an eye because this one is obviously very dark. So I'm just going to draw in the eye shape here, fill that in completely. And it's Robert Smith, of course. He's got lots of makeup on. If you're just starting out, drawing, painting people with makeup on is a lot easier. Somebody like Boy George, for instance, I put my finger in the paint down here, that happens. Boy George, for instance, is very, very nice to paint. His strong look, his makeup really, really helps. Same with Robert Smith here. He's great, isn't he? Right. He's got a really strong look. So that's the inside of that lower lid there. And then we're just going to go along. Sorry about my phone beeping. We're just going to go along and fill in this entire area with Payne's grey, nice and dark. This is the darkest we want it to be. It's the focal point, it's the main eye. The other eye is only a little bit of white under here. It's all hidden under the hair. And we're going to have a great fun doing all of that later on. There's going to be a lot of darks going on. It takes a lot of confidence to put that level of darks down. So you take a deep breath and you get on with it. Right. So that's that area filled in, and you can see that eye form happen quite nicely. Now under here, I want a slight blur on this eye edge, and I've got a little bit of orange to go in just here. I don't want too much Payne's grey to bleed out. I'm lucky, it's worked beautifully, and the orange has gone just up slightly into the grey. I don't know if you can see that. I've got some areas of grey just to mark out there, so I'll just use a clean brush and pull up some of the paint that's still wet here and drag it into this white area that I want. Now, of course, I can describe this eyeball even more by putting a shadow here. Just think of the top of a ball. It's got this roof over it, the eyelid, so under here has got a natural shadow like under a canopy. But I'll leave that for a minute, let this dry a little because I don't want this all to bleed out. A lot of watercolour work is about constantly looking how wet something is, how dry it is, what sort of effects you get at different points in the drying process. Now see how this Payne's grey is all bleeding out now. I don't really want that much. So what I'm going to do is get a clean brush, just soak that up, dry it on my tissue, soak it up, dry it on my tissue. There we go. I'm going to take out all of this. So you see watercolour can be quite forgiving, and you don't have to rush, you don't have to worry. And there we are. I'm quite pleased with that, and some interesting things happen as a result of it. And that's where the faith comes in. You've got to let watercolour work its own magic to an extent. Okay, so then I'm just going to wet this area. Not soaked. I don't want it soaked, although in other situations I may. And I'm going to, here's the nose here. That's going to be blocked in with some darks for the underside of the nose. Here's the round of the cheek. So I'm just going to put some clean water in there, so I can just go in with a little bit of cadmium yellow just to describe this cheek form here. And we'll keep going round with that. There we go. Now here, obviously, it's the side of the face. It's going to be darker. Look at that. I've let hard edge happen there. I try not to do that. So I'm going to just go in and soften that. I'm not sure quite what I'm going to do with that in a few minutes. But just get that edge. Get rid of that hard edge. Harder when it's completely dry, you see. Obviously, we want some hard edges for contrast, but not all. I want to drop a little bit more orange just in there while that's still a bit wet. Might have to leave that actually. Drop that in there and leave that. Okay, right, so I've wet this area here. This has all gone soaked in now, and I'm just gonna drop in a little bit of orange here. And like I say, we don't have to worry, we don't have to get it all down at once. We can just bleed it out, make sure it's sort of going where we want it to go, lift it out where it's not, bring it round here, sweep that colour around, but we don't mess, don't overwork watercolour because that shows. And if you want a professional looking painting, very often less is more. Don't fiddle, don't fiddle. Right, okay, I think I've done about as much as I can do in that little bit. I don't want to make these initial tutorials too long. I'll keep them short, partly because my internet is steam powered and it takes forever to upload videos. Right, so I'm just going to put in, just checking, just moving my head around, move the paper around, see how shiny this eye is. It's still really quite wet. I'm not going to risk putting this blue in here for a shadow because I think this will just all bleed out and it'll be too much. Let's get a last little bit, just a little bit of this nostril. Well, it's not nostril. I just want to get a pencil and define where I'm going here with this. I'm just going to draw that and put that in there so I know how far to come down. And then I'm just going to fill that area in with one sweep of the brush. Always nice to do that if you can, rather than like colouring in, filling in your edges and then going and filling in your middle. Try and get it all down in one if you can. It really does make all these tiny little things really do make the difference and make for a professional painting. And I'm just going to bring this down here. I think I might just fill in all this area. I've got a dark tone mapped out there, so let's get that in. Get that. You can always come back, put more dark over the top. What you can't do is make something lighter after it's dried. Well, you can lift out, but that only works to a point and only works with certain colours. It works with Payne's Grey, which is delightful because I love Payne's Grey. Right, last little thing before I stop this video, I think, is we're just going to give it a little more depth here because this is dry enough to do it. And I'm going to come back in the second video and we'll have a bit more of a look of this, I think. There again, I might just move on to something else. We'll see. Right, now it's my style just to make things want to be nice and drippy and loose. I like spatters. He looks a bit like Hitler at the moment. It's just this. It will change, I promise. Okay. All right, we're looking okay there. So I'm going to pause this for a minute. And I'll come back and we'll get this hand in when this is dry. And we'll get all these darks in and hopefully you'll see Robert Smith really start to come to life. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this and you've got something from it. Do subscribe. I'll put the link to my website up at the end of the video. And there'll be many more of these types of videos coming along soon. Okay, great. See you soon.